I'd like to introduce the idea I'm going to talk about here with a joke that I like to tell all of my stat students. So, a mathematician, an engineer, and a statistician are sitting at a bar, and someone comes up to the three of them and asks, "What's 2 plus 2?" The mathematician thinks for a second, looks at the guy like he's got 3 heads, and tells him it's 4. The engineer, wanting to be careful, takes out a pad of paper, grabs a calculator, crunches the numbers for 10 minutes, and says, it's 3.9999. The statistician thinks for a second, takes a drink, and asks him, well, what do you want it to be? And that is a very important thing to remember when we're dealing with the fact that statistics is an interpretive science. There's always a bit of an assumption here that we are going to be honest and fair and truthful, and that we'd never, ever, ever do something for the wrong reasons, and we'd never go into a situation with our goal in mind and try to twist the evidence to make it fit that. Who would do that? Who would lie with statistics? It's just not right. At least that's what we'd hope. In reality, as anyone who's ever had an argument on the internet could tell you, a lot of times people go into things not necessarily looking to have their ideas challenged, but really looking to have their ideas proved correct, regardless of what it is that they actually say, regardless of what it is that the data actually represents. And sometimes, when people are that committed to their idea, well, they can be a little bit subtle about how they choose to present things. For example, looking at this graph we have here on the poverty rate over time, it looks fairly dramatic in terms of how that line sharply goes up over the years 2001 to 2004. But if we pay close attention to that vertical axis and re-represent that as a table, we can see that that's not a whole lot of a change. And if we change that vertical scale a little bit more, make it instead of in terms of 0.4%, which is often a small amount, make it in terms of 2%, the poverty rate hasn't changed all that much. So depending on which story you want to tell, that poverty was strictly increasing around the new millennium, or that poverty was more or less static around the new millennium, how you write that picture up will make a big difference. And to help build this idea a little bit more, let's take a couple more examples here that push the limits even further. So let's consider the graphs that we have here, where in the first one, hey, we got some real creativity there. It really pops off the screen, but with those stand-in houses as bars and the weirdly canted shadows, it's incredibly hard to tell what the consistent scale is supposed to be there. It just makes it look like the year 2010 was really, really bad, or really, really good. It's hard to say what they're really going for there in terms of the square footage in that case. And for that matter, there isn't really a consistent horizontal scale. I guess the houses are getting wider over time, so that fits with that, but it makes it look like there's a huge change from 1990 to 2010 and 1980 to 1990, but really, it's not the case. Point is here, that one is it's a little bit ambiguous in every meaningful sense, and it highlights a thing that may or may not be at all accurate for the sake of some unclear argument about square footage. Then in that second case, we're going a little bit stranger because we've got years at the bottom. At the very least, that's consistent, but the vertical and very ominous scale is standards of something. In this case, artistic standards, but there's absolutely no measurement in there of what that is. I guess standards went up in 1850, then they've just been going down since. Must not be a fan of Art Deco or a whole lot of other things. It's really sad they dislike art so much, but you don't have any sort of numerical scale here to actually make a meaningful comparison. It just seems like this graph exists to make people angry, give them strong emotions about art. Point is here, they're building with a goal in mind. And even though I made this picture a little bit bigger, it's just because the scaling on it's a little bit funky. Doesn't mean it's more important. What I want you to take away from this is to understand that when we're making these sorts of representations, it is important to be eye-catching in the way that these most certainly are, but in my opinion, maybe not everyone's, unfortunately, what you should focus on more is making sure that the data is honestly and accurately represented. If you make something that is honest and dramatic, that's the best case scenario. But, well, at the very least, you should know to understand or know what to look for in terms of silliness like this. Anyway, these are some of the things that we should bear in mind, some of the things that we're working from, some of our basic structures for our last week of new material. We'll be moving on into the rest of Chapter 12 to talk about the measurements we can take in these things in terms of how we look at average behavior and amounts of variation. See you all next week.